Hey everybody, it's me, Scott, your hero from Heroic Studios Gaming. Hi, how you doing? Thanks for coming in and visiting. Today we're going to talk about the Altered Carbon book series. I promised that to you in the rushed update that I did, so I'm doing it now. My hair looks really bad. Hope you don't mind. So let's talk about that real fast. I'm going to try not to. I actually recorded this once before and it was a really long video. I realized that I had sort of rambled a bit, but so I'm doing this again, make it a little bit nicer for you guys. Let's talk about the Altered Carbon series. This is the Altered Carbon series right there. I nailed it again. This is the Altered Carbon series by Richard Morgan. It's a 3-book series that covers the character Takeshi Kovacs. In fact, it wasn't even called the Altered Carbon series. It was called the Kovacs series because Richard Morgan has other books, which, don't matter, actually, because we're not talking about them. But anyway, Richard Morgan, well, I did with Philip K. Dick, but that's not important. Philip K. Dick's, Richard Morgan's Altered Carbon series is a book series that follows a character named Takeshi Kovacs. Now, if you've never seen the show on Netflix, well, I don't know what to tell you. The show on Netflix is pretty good. It's a good romp. There's some things I like most of the acting in the first season. I don't really like the choice for main character for Takeshi Kovacs, which is strange. He has some physical traits, I guess, but like his acting is John Cena level. But it's okay. I'll say it's okay. And then the second season has great acting, but like a really confusing, convoluted storyline. And the storyline mostly follows the one created by the TV show because they sort of just took the favorite things they liked from the second and third books and sort of smashed them together and then had to sort of maintain the fact that they had changed the main aspect of the character. So what is that, you might ask? Well, let's get into it. Who is Takeshi Kovacs? Right? Why is this called the Kovacs series? Well, Takeshi Kovacs is a character who opens up a story and lets us know that we're in the future of Earth, like hundreds of years in the future. Like it's like 2400 or something like that, since the year 2400 and something. In the book series. And the United Nations, the UN, has sort of spread across the galaxy and like taken over a bunch of planets. There's lots of peoples and colonies and places and governors because we could. Because, and this is the story, sometime in the early 2000s-ish, sometime now-ish, we finally sent a mission to Mars that managed to uncover the alien technology there. And what we discovered is that there was a whole group of these aliens that were all over the place. The elders or whatever, they were all over the stars, like for whatever they like, and there were and sort of we get more in the second book that there were a couple of different races of them essentially, and there was kind of like a war going on or whatever. Anyway, but these aliens that we find on Mars, the Martians, as are called in the book series, the show calls them the elders, but in the book they're called the Martians. These Martians had this cool technology that we eventually sort of adapted and changed, and we realized that they could move consciousnesses around in a technological way. So we ended up sort of stealing this tech, and we rebranded it. We sort of took it, and we can put human consciousness on a disk, essentially on a hard drive, on a thumb drive, and we can insert it into people's brain stems right below their head, right between their head and their neck, and we can hold their consciousness there. This consciousness holding container is the size of a cigarette. In the show, it's actually a coin, like a big flat coin, but it looks like the size of a cigarette, or cigarette butt, I think is what he describes it as. And it's injected in there, and it basically records all of your thoughts and memories and everything that is you, and sort of keeps it on like this thing called a stack. And so it keeps it in the stack, in this cortical stack, and it keeps it there, and then you can die, you can do all kinds of stuff, and then they just take the stack back out and then just slot it into a new body called a sleeve. And this is what the series is all about, because it's altered carbon. The carbon of you can move around. You can change different carbons, right? So you can alter the carbon and make it whatever you want. So there's all these things about like body modifications that you can do because it doesn't matter. It's not permanent damage, so whatever. There's this whole thing about like, the way that like certain types of industries work when you like acting, for example, you can hire actors. They could literally do scenes where they die and you record it, and it doesn't matter because you'll just take the consciousness out and slide it into another sleeve. And if the actor is rich enough, they'll have multiple cloned bodies so that they can just go back into another body, and so it doesn't matter. And and it'll look exactly the same, like maybe without any other blemishes they may have picked up along the way or whatever. And that's where it gets into this conversation about like people who have money, people that don't have money, and like artificial sleeves and like natal sleeves and stuff like that. So there's this whole series about like the bodies and the brains and inserting your consciousness into other bodies, which is a really cool thought process and a really cool sort of exploration in a science fiction sense of like what could be. Like if I could say, for example, body jack you, right? If I could steal your sleeve, and then I can insert my consciousness into you, can I do something like transfer all of your money to my account and then get my consciousness transferred back into my body, and now I'm rich because I stole all your money, right? So this is like question about that, like, and it's weird because he opens this door for this kind of thing to be discussion, and it's actually kind of the main point of like the main story, where there's this question about sleeving and memories and things like that, and so this sort of thing goes on where there's this situation, but he doesn't really explore that very well in the book series, because my question was always like, if you could just slip into someone else's body, then how would things like biometric security work if you were you're in someone else's body? You could easily get past biometric security if you have their biometrics, right? And the book series does not cover that, which is really kind of disappointing. He doesn't walk down that road far enough. Like he opens the door and then doesn't do the thought experiment beyond that, which is sad. But otherwise, it's really great world building, because you have this whole thing where there's this caste system based on like how long you've lived and whether or not you spent some time in the freezer, right, in lockup if you were in jail. Because if you're frozen, like Takeshi Kovacs is actually technically old enough to be Methuselah, which is what they call the really old people who have lots of money. But he isn't a Methuselah because he's been in jail for like 60 years, right? At the start of the story, he's been in jail because he's a criminal, and there's a whole backstory there. But the main idea is that he has certain skills that are needed by a Methuselah who needs to investigate a thing. And this is the first book. It's a really great detective noir story in a cyberpunkian, cyber type world. So it creates this sort of, there's this seedy underbelly that's developed from technology and people trying to live their lives, but also are automatically, re-sleeved if they die, except for a religious movement that's trying to keep people from re-sleeving. And so certain people are not supposed to be re-sleeved when they die, and some of them are getting re-sleeved when they die. Some of them people are not signed up to be not re-sleeved when they die, but then suddenly, right before they get brutally murdered or something, they signed up to not be re-sleeved, and then they get brutally murdered. And there's only one question: why would they sign this document literally like an hour before they got murdered, when they signed a document a couple hours before that agreeing to be murdered for money, right? So like there's this sort of question that sort of starts coming up, where it starts to leave a really weird note, which is the experiment that's what the story follows, is this sort of conspiracy thing, which is very much of a noir story. So we have this detective noir story set in the future, and therefore it's very cool. It's very cool for that. The second, that's Altered Carbon. Second book and third book in the series, called Broken Angel and Woken Furies. They're right there. I don't know why I was looking around. But Broken Angel and Woken Furies, those follow different aspects. And like the jump between the first book and the second book is like 70 years or something. And Takeshi Kovacs is a mercenary, and he's doing mercenary stuff, and he's in the military. He's actually in the military, and he's doing like military operations, and someone offers him the opportunity to make $1 billion by doing this heist thing, like stealing something right out from underneath the military's nose, and he agrees to it for some reason, and decides that he's going to go on this heist. And so the whole story is like a Ocean's 11 style heist story, but like involving the military. And the fact that they're like, they can re-sleeve, not important, apparently. Like they're not going to slip into somebody's body to be able to get things out of like storages or lockdowns or things like that. Nah. The fact that they re-sleeve is not important to the story, which is very weird, because that was the whole point of the first book. Second book doesn't care about that. And then it just cares about the military operations. And then the third book, Takeshi Kovacs is a completely different character, and it's been like 60 or 70 years since the second book, and the events in the first and second book are only slightly semi-referenced, not important, so it's not a chain of stuff. So you could literally read each of these stories out of order and not care. But the third one follows mostly like the previous life of Takeshi Kovacs, because he's back on his home planet of Harlan's world and stuff, and we get like more of the story of like him before he became an envoy. envoys are the thing that Takeshi Kovacs is, which is why he can do a lot of the stuff that he can do, and the reason why he's an important character in the story. An envoy is essentially the UN's military operations. They go from planet to planet doing military stuff, right? Make sure everyone stays in line, and no planetary governor's not developing nukes to nuke another planet, right? So they have this military force that does that. The envoys are the special forces of that military force who are used to jumping into bodies that's called needle casting, where they're sent, their information is downloaded into a stack on planet and usually into a body that's actually currently occupied, and thus replacing the person's something I can't think of their consciousness, what they call it, but suddenly replacing their stack information with this needle cast and military stack information, and thus infiltrating organizations and groups to therefore do whatever business the UN wants on the planet incognito. So they slip into, like, let's say, for example, a planetary governor has a problem with some rebels and decides to call in the UN and says, hey, listen, I'll let you do some operations here, right? You just got to help me do this. So what they do is they'll needle cast into some of the rebels and then, like, destroy this rebel group from the inside. And that's what the envoys do. They're sanctioned, militarily trained military special forces. Not in, like, if you watch the show, it's like they're a rebel organization or whatever. That is not what it is in the book. He's actually super special forces trained, and therefore is just really good at his job. But the downside to this sort of this envoy training, this envoy thing, is that you sign, the military people who sign up for it sign special agreements and, like, set themselves up, and they're with certain, cortical stack blocks or whatever, where they can't hold office or they can't hold any sort of governmental office. They can't have regular bank accounts. They don't qualify for credit scores to, like, get loans and stuff. And so they essentially, this is to keep them from being corrupted, right? This is to keep them from having a planetary governor say, like, hey, if you just stop what you're doing, I'll give you, like, whole swaths of land. It'll be yours because, I'll just give you $1 bazillion or something. This is to keep them from being able to be corrupted. And the downside is that if then an incident occurs where the person decides that they want to leave the military, like quit their job, quit being an envoy, they immediately have no other choice but to be a mercenary or a criminal. They've got to steal things. It's like a very Aladdin story of, like, you got to, eat to live and you got to steal to eat kind of thing. So Takeshi Kovacs is both a special forces trained person and a criminal, because he had an incident which occurred before the first book series on a planet called Inanin, where his entire team was killed off by a virus that was injected into them, and he needle cast in right after, and so his team all dies around him, and there's, like, all this stuff. But they realize that, like, he and that second wave of people that are coming into Inanin realize that something is very badly wrong and are calling for they're calling for reinforcements. They're calling for the needle casting to stop. They're calling for, like, extraction, and the government, their leaders don't support them at all. And so everybody ends up dying except for Takeshi Kovacs and a few other people, whom are characters that show up in the third book finally. But anyway, so this Inanin incident caused him to leave, which then meant he had to go be a criminal. That's what he had to do. And so that's what he is. So he's this sort of mixture of a military trained person and a criminal, and the military training helps him be a better criminal. And he's doing this job for a very rich person named Methuselah. So this world building in the stories is actually pretty cool. So that's very cool. Now let's talk about some of the differences between the TV show and the books. I just mentioned the thing that the envoys are completely different. The other thing is that some of the characters in the TV show are, like, have way more subterfuge going on. They're way more deep and inceptive and, like, sly in the TV show. But in the book series, they're a lot more straightforward. Like, someone specifically tells him that they don't want him to continue doing his job, and they keep sending someone to deliver that message to him. And so he knows full well who the bad guy is. He knows who his enemy is from the very beginning. Like, literally, I think, like, the second chapter, he knows who his enemy is, which is very weird. In the show, it's like who his enemy is really confusing. And also in the show, they included his family. Like, his sister gets involved, like, she's there. But in the book series, like, his sister's, long dead back on Harlan's world, and he has no idea what family he still has that exists out there. And he doesn't really care because he hated his father, his abusive drunk father, which turned him into a bad person in the first place, which led him to join the military instead of going to jail, which led him to join the Envoys, etc. So there's that. Then the other thing is that the technology in the book series is very weird because the book came out in 2008, but it doesn't consider like touchscreen technology. Takeshi Kovacs has to still keep using keyboards and stuff, despite the fact that like tablets exist. He has to use like computers, which is very strange. And that's what was confusing because in 2008 I had an iTouch, and the book doesn't even consider like that would be a portable touch device would be a thing that somebody might have, which is very strange. So the TV show does much better with their technology aspect, which is great. And visual aspect. There's like not descriptive visuals in the book series at all, but the TV show has lots of like neon lights and neon signs and floating things and holograms and stuff. That's all. Most of that is not there in the book. It's just mostly like he walks into a door, there's something there, and like everything's like physically there. And then thirdly, the main character or the character Poe in the show, in the book series is called Hendrix because he's Jimi Hendrix, and it's all about music and it's all about playing his guitar in the corner, and it's not about sort of the Edgar Allan Poe stuff. He's also not super dedicated to Kovacs like he is in the show, so he's just kind of there and occasionally does stuff to help, but he's really not important to the story at all. In fact, he's only in it in a couple of places. Sure, part of what he does is sort of integral with the computer systems and stuff, but it's not at all like the Poe character from the TV show. So those are the three main aspects between the show. Now that I've talked about the good things, the things that I like, let's talk about the sort of cons of this book series. Firstly, this particular image right here that you're seeing up at the corner there of the book series it came from the web, as you can tell. It's just an internet stolen picture that listed this series as a young adult series, which surprised me because whoever described it as a young adult series clearly never read the book. And if they did, then they have a weirdly twisted view on what young adult means, because it's actually like a adult book. And I don't mean that it's hard to read. I mean like literally every book has at least 3 sex scenes in them. And they're not just like fade to black, they slept together, okay, cool, we get it. Like they made out and then like they wake up in bed together the next chapter, like that kind of thing. No. Richard Morgan goes into great detail to describe to you who's touching whom, where, how, and why that causes them to have an orgasm, and what happens after that, and does that lead to yet another one. Like it's very, very much like something you'd read on like Literotica or something. It's very detailed description of the sex sequences, and it made me feel like I started getting uncomfortable. I think the first one I sort of slogged through, and the second one I was like, really, there's a second one? And then like the third one I was like, I'm not going to read this. I'm definitely skipping this. But it happens in all 3 books. There are 3 in each book. There's 9 total over the series of these really detailed, takes up like 10 pages sort of sex scenes, which is very strange. But like it's feeling like, especially in the second book, it was feeling like these were almost like pent up like things that Richard Morgan was experiencing, and he decided to just write out some erotica because he felt like it, because he needed to. And for whatever reason, the editors were like, yeah, let's keep it in. I don't know, but it's definitely not young adult. It's definitely adult. Plus, like, there's swear words all over the place in the book series, like all over the place. I think there's like in the first chapter alone, there's like 6 F-bombs, like just in the first chapter. So, like, I don't understand why this was listed as a young adult. It's definitely an adult book. There's lots of swear words. There's definitely lots of sex scenes. So that's not the greatest thing, but it, whatever. Second thing was that Richard Morgan opens a door for some really great thought experiments about re-sleeving and stuff, but he doesn't walk into it. He just doesn't explore it, which is kind of disappointing, especially if that was the thing that he's introducing, and then he just doesn't really go down that road very much. He does a little bit in the first book, and we get some cool sequences about double sleeving that come up quite a bit. But then in the second and third books, sleeving and re-sleeving don't matter very much. Like there's in fact this whole like 1/3 of the second book or third book, they're carrying a dead body around because they don't want to just remove the stack and then slide it into a new body. I don't know why. They have ample access. They even knock a bunch of people, like they basically knock them unconscious. They can easily strip the stack and swap the body, but they don't for some reason. Just keep carrying around this dead body. I don't know why. So this is very strange. The third thing is that the books are way not connected to each other, like at all. You literally just read them however you want. Doesn't matter. So reading them in order or reading all three of them is tremendously not important to like your understanding of what's going on. You just would understand more about Takeshi Kovacs, I guess. You read the third book, you get a lot more of his backstory about his life, but since it's not important in the first book, it doesn't matter that you didn't know that in the first book. It's not important at all. In fact, it's barely important to the third book. It's somewhat important, but there's actually more backstory that's important to the third book that occurs in the first book. But it's still not important because he explains it anyway in the third book. So you don't need to read them in order at all. So I don't know. But otherwise, I think it's the first book is definitely a very cool cyber noir story. And I like this idea of a cyberpunk noir thing, and that's what sort of made me link the two together. And I didn't really think about it until I read Altered Carbon, that there actually is a tremendous link between detective noir stories from like the 50s and 60s and the current cyberpunk stories of the 70s and 80s, right? And we can kind of link those together, and you can kind of chain something like this, where you have this detective story that takes place in the future. And that's big. That's basically it. So that's my review on Altered Carbon. I would say read the first book, forget about the other two books. And if you don't feel like you want to read through some very intimate moments between some characters, some of which you don't even need to know about because they only exist for this scene alone, then great. Then you can probably read the first book and just sort of skip whole chunks of it. Also there's like, it's very clear from the beginning, like what's going on in the first book. So you can read the first book in the first couple of chapters, know who all of the different noir characters are, like right off the bat, and then you're good to go. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting and fun story to read if you like that kind of thing. So I'd recommend reading the first one. You read the second and third ones if you want to get the full story, but I don't think you need to. You can read the first one. But all right, so next time I'll talk about the Altered Carbon RPG and how they decided to move with like this story plus the Netflix show and turn it into an RPG, Hunter's Entertainment, and I'll tell you more about my involvement with that because I was involved in that to, not to a great extent, but I was involved in that process, and my name is actually in the book because of my involvement. So, we'll cover that next time. Thanks for watching this video. I will see you guys on the other side.